We begin with the breaking news. The United States has launched cruise missile strikes against a Syrian airbase. Yesterday evening, 59 Tomahawk missiles were launched from the USS Ross and USS Porter in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, targeting the Shayrat airfield near the city of Homs. It follows a chemical attack on Tuesday by the Syrian regime against a rebel-held area that killed roughly 100 people, including dozens of children. Turkish authorities say autopsies supervised by the World Health Organization show sarin gas was most likely used. The Pentagon says the strikes targeted Syrian aircraft and infrastructure, including fuel supply, storage, ammunition, air defense, and radar systems. According to U.S. officials, extraordinary measures were taken to avoid civilian casualties, and no personnel were targeted. A Syrian military spokesman claims at least 6 people on the ground were killed. Russia, which also operates out of the targeted airfield, received warnings of the strikes through secure channels. So here we go.
David Ignatius, just last week, the Trump administration sounded like it was going to follow the Obama administration's position, which was to essentially yield Syria and the people of Syria to the fate of Assad and Putin. Donald Trump appeared over this past week to be mugged by reality, as the old saying goes.
I think he found the consequences of embracing Assad, which is in effect what he did, just too horrifying. I thought the president was sincere in saying, looking at those photographs of the little children choking to death as they died was abhorrent. And I think he said, frankly, I changed my mind. I didn't think that I would embrace this policy, but I did. So it's now fallen to Donald Trump to enforce the red line that was first enunciated by President Obama, but that he did not follow through on. I think it has significant consequences for his presidency. He's chosen the least drastic of the military options that General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, put before him, but he has acted.
Just, I want to make sure our viewers understand that in answering this next question, I don't know where you stand on these attacks. You would be in no way endorsing the attacks of last night, but can you explain why so many people, not only in Washington and the foreign policy community, but across the world, were disheartened and concerned after Assad's first chemical weapon attack was met with no response, and what those fears, how those fears would have multiplied if they had not been answered this second time?
Joe, I think we've had these last 4 years a lesson in what the credibility of American power is. When a president says, as Barack Obama did, that use of chemical weapons will cross a red line established by the United States, and then doesn't take action to enforce the red line, air goes out of the balloon, and we watched that with President Obama. By taking that action, Donald Trump has restored the credibility of American power. He now inherits nightmarish problems in Syria. Nobody should misunderstand how difficult this would be, but in terms of the credibility of American power, I think most traditional Washington commentators would say he's put more oomph, more believability back into it.
And yet, Caddy, when the history is written of however this story ends, just like some looked at statements made to Saddam Hussein in late 1990, leading up to his belief that the United States wouldn't act if he went into Kuwait. Certainly a lot of people will be looking at the statements of this administration, especially Rex Tillerson just last week, saying, well, this is really up to Assad and the Syrian people, as perhaps his gave Assad the belief that he could launch another chemical attack on his people. The United States would do nothing.
There are a slew of tweets out there from the course of the campaign as well, with President Trump saying that Barack Obama would be crazy to take action against Syria, that this was not America's problem, the focus should be back here at home. Having said that this crossed a lot of lines for him, President Trump put himself in a position where he had to take some kind of action. And there are now still a lot of questions about why he acted now when he'd already seen victims of chemical attacks from a few years ago, that the images were all out there.
Right, but I saw that a lot last night. A lot of people talking about he's president now.
Of course.
And when you're president now, it rests on your shoulders. You can't tweet and run into, you know, the back room. He's president. He saw it happen. And I do think, despite what Donald Trump said in the campaign, we're going to see him act more aggressively against ISIS. We're going to see him respond to these type of attacks, because I think that's probably a lot more who he is at his gut.
Clearly for the people who thought he was going to be an isolationist president who's not going to get involved,
it's not going to happen.
Yesterday dispelled that. But he's going to have to deal with the fallout of this, and if it's just a small tactical strike and it's limited at that, maybe the fallout will be limited as well. But this does raise questions about the relationship with Russia, about the fight against Islamic State and whether it complicates that. And President Trump is now more fully engaged in the Middle East than he was 48 hours ago, and he will have to deal with that.
The Russia relationship.
To your point a second ago, Joe, your question, you know, I saw John McCain on this network yesterday, and he was asked the same thing. Did Rex Tillerson's comments, Nikki Haley's comments last week, invite the Syrian chemical attack? And McCain answered by saying, effectively, forget about that.
Right.
What invited this was not just those things, was Donald Trump's soft talk on Russia over the course of 18 months. This goes back, he's being tested not just for things that his administration said 5 days ago, but for things that he said 18 months ago, where now Vladimir Putin and Assad are testing him at this very moment. And that was before he had decided to launch the 59 cruise missiles last night. So, you know, it is the case. You know, there are a lot of things that led to what Assad did, and now Donald Trump has taken this action. And in a lot of ways, you know, this is, somebody said the other day when on another network when Trump gave his speech to the joint session, you know, this is the moment when he becomes president.
Right.
And I think that the moment when someone becomes president of the United States is the moment when they first really use American military might. That's the moment when everyone looks and sat back, whether they like him or don't like him. That's the moment where you stand back and say, okay, that guy's the president of the United States now. That's the moment. Again, not for good or ill, not approving, not disapproving, just as a baptism. This is it.
And on the Russian front, Mika, it is extraordinary that we launched missiles into a country where there were Russian troops.
That's right.
And that, of course, reframes some of the Russian Trump debate on how obsequious he's going to be to Vladimir Putin, because obviously this is open to schism. And I suspect what the Russians will find is the more they taunt him, like, for instance, they said, oh, it really didn't cause much damage.
Right.
They will find that Donald Trump will say, okay, well, thank you for your intel on the ground. We are now going to attack again tonight, because that's who Donald Trump is.
I totally agree with you, and to your point, a spokesman for President Vladimir Putin says the missile strikes represent a, quote, significant blow to U.S.-Russia relations. According to the Kremlin, the American operation was a breach of international law, insisting the Syrian army has no chemical weapons at its disposal. And Russia put out its own spin on the strikes, releasing video that purports to show the aftermath of the attack, with planes still in the hangar. So let's bring in NBC News Pentagon correspondent Hans Nichols. Hans, what can you report for us, especially given what the Russians say they saw happen?
Well, all night and talking to Pentagon officials, what struck out to me was that that deconfliction line was still open, that the U.S. gave Russia effectively a warning. They used it multiple times, but also that when they took those strikes on that base, they knew Russian personnel were also at that base. And that gives you an indication that Donald Trump has a remarkable amount of confidence in these Tomahawk missiles and the precision from the United States military. Now, we haven't gotten any specific reaction to the Russian side of this, namely that some of these TLAMs, some of these Tomahawk missiles were not successful. They've got their eyes and ears up. This is the U.S. Side of things, the ISR. They're probably going to be taking a closer look this morning now that it's in the daylight. One other reality that the Pentagon is waking up to this morning, and that is that the U.S. troops that are in Syria, and they're just shy of about 1,000, they're there not only with one more hostile actor, but also with the hostile actor, the Russian, the Syrian regime, that has chemical weapons. and they may have to review their entire intelligence on this because, you know, that 2013 deal brokered by John Kerry, that seems to be that it left some chemical weapons there. And that's not something that we had heard a whole lot at the Pentagon, that the Assad regime was still armed with these chemical weapons. They were taken, frankly, a little bit by surprise. Guys?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Hans. In fact, we were told over the past month by former Obama officials that this issue had been taken care of. It has not. David Ignatius, it's interesting when I talked to White House officials, several White House officials last night, I kept asking how other countries responded. And what they told me, of course, we'll find out in the light of day when the press releases start going out, but said that it was praise across the board. And some countries, especially some Arab states, thanking the president for acting. Even Canada was grateful that the United States acted against what they consider to be this international crime. What does that mean for U.S. foreign policy going forward in Syria if this gets more complicated?
It means that the traditional alliances become stronger. The Gulf Arabs have been pleading for this kind of tough-minded U.S. policy. They think this conflict really is about the U.S. and its allies versus Iran. And I think the space to watch, in addition to Russia and Russia's reaction, is Iran's reaction. Iran has proxy forces in Lebanon that could strike at Israel. Iran has proxy forces in Yemen that could move to close a strategic strait there by mining it further. So the U.S.-Iran dimension is going to be a big part of this. But I was hearing enthusiastic support from French officials, certainly from Emirati and Saudi officials. This is the kind of strong American presidential action that they've been wanting to see now since the Syrian war began. And so there'll be no arguments from them.
So joining us now from outside Boston, we have former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, now the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, if we could ask you, David was talking about this tough-minded U.S. policy, a show of strength, which is very Trump, and also a show of moral authority, for sure, in light of what we've been watching happen in Syria now for years. But what are the potential ramifications or challenges ahead with countries like Russia and Iran?
And if you could begin your comments, first of all, we want to know, as to what Mika said, is this something that the White House said we needed to do this as a show of strength? We also needed to do this as a show of moral authority. Do you agree, before answering Mika's question, do you agree with those two positions that the United States needed to act after the events of this week?
I absolutely do. I think this was appropriate, and I think it was legal under international law. I do also believe that, as David said, it sends a very salutary and most needed message to our allies. I think it pushes back on their heels a bit, the Russians and the Iranians. I think the really interesting ally to watch here is also Turkey. What is their reaction? It's been very positive. Now the game is on for, okay, what comes next? So, you know, the old saying, a single swallow does not a spring make, a single tomahawk strike does not a spring make either. We've got a lot of work to do now to sit back, look at the diplomatic options, look at the conversation with Russia. Where does that go? What follows now, I think, is the really interesting set of constraints. But in terms of the right decision, this was it. It's the appropriate level of force. It was well done militarily, good day for the Navy, and I feel overall this will have at least a stopping effect on the flow of activity. We'll have to see if we can negotiate with the Russians in a way that really puts some kind of constraints on Bashar al-Assad.
Katty Kay.
Admiral, a tactical strike can be just that, a tactical strike, and this one seems to have been successful in its aims. But what does it do in terms of the long-term strategy, and how does it change the situation on the ground in Syria, do you think?
To the latter, Katty, it doesn't change the tactical situation on the ground to any significant degree. The Air Force of Assad still has great capability in order to continue this kind of work. But what it does do is it sends a message that the United States does intend to be involved, is willing to use force, will act to try and put constraints. So I think there's a greater strategic impact than there is tactical impact, to be honest with you.
And also, how important, I'll ask you the question I asked David Ignatius, how important is it of a message not only send to Assad, but also send to the leaders of North Korea, send to the leaders of Iran and other countries, that even though Assad has killed 500,000 of his people, caused 5 million to flee, has used chemical weapons against them, and it seemed as if there were no international norms anymore, no red lines that could be crossed. How important do you think it is strategically that that message is now out there? Yes, he's struck one of several airfields, but is there not a better understanding in Damascus this afternoon that if he uses chemical weapons again, there will be another airfield or another military target hit?
That's exactly the thought that the administration wants to plant in Syria, but also globally. And as we used to say in the Soviet Union, it is no coincidence, comrade, that these strikes happen to occur during the Mar-a-Lago summit. I think another recipient of the message here is actually Xi Jinping, who is watching this unfold literally in real time. I think that's a strong signal also for events in Asia, that the United States would be willing to use military force there, and that may have a helpful effect a clarifying effect in the conversations with China today.
All right. Thank you so much, Admiral. Greatly appreciate it. David Ignatius, that's the last point he made was a point that two top Trump officials said when I said, well, aren't you concerned that you're in the middle of a Chinese state dinner? They said, we would only be concerned if he didn't get the message.
Well, this is
that if we will do this in Syria, if we have to do this in North Korea, we will. We don't want to. But they actually were, I won't say they were pleased with the timing. They certainly weren't disappointed with the timing.
It's dramatic pre-dinner theater.
Yes.
It sets the table. It establishes the credibility of American power. Trump's problem in dealing with the Chinese and everyone else is he big talk? Is he bluster, but no delivery? And by taking action quickly and in a way that's moved with surprising speed, I think he's demonstrated this isn't just talk. I mean it. I'm going to enforce the positions that I take, and that obviously has effect in these major trade-focused negotiations with China.
The Chinese also saw General Mattis coming down and saw McMaster, saw some professionals.
The whole team.
Saw some professionals down there. They did not see Steve Bannon going around with a group of people at Breitbart advising the president. The president brought down the best and the brightest that he had. And the Chinese saw that. Let's talk about reaction from the Hill so far. Yeah. Tell me, what have you seen? What have you heard from the Hill?
Well, my inbox is full overnight with bipartisan approval of what the president did. Democrats basically saying we need to place this in the context of a larger strategy. You need to consult more with the Hill, but all Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, all saying, good, we approve. Now let's have another conversation. Republicans broadly supportive, except for a couple of exceptions like Rand Paul, who are not in favor of this and want to see a more restrained foreign policy. But Lindsey Graham and John McCain, most strikingly, putting out a joint statement last night. Two guys who, in some ways, pose the greatest political threat of all to Donald Trump. Yeah. Democrats can't hurt Donald Trump. They're in the minority on the House and Senate. The only real threat to Donald Trump's viability is within his own party. And because of McCain and Graham's the iconoclasm and willingness to break with their own party, those guys pose a potentially huge threat to Trump on a lot of fronts.
By the way, add Marco Rubio to that list, who came out very early last night praising the president. He will be here later on today.
And the only reason I don't put him in that category initially is because in some ways he's so young. McCain just has this stature, right? Former nominee of his party, war hero, all those things that accrue to McCain. When McCain takes Trump on, it has a kind of gravitas that no one else in the Republican Party has. So to see McCain and Graham last night on not just praising Trump, but praising him fulsomely. He has neutralized, for the moment at least, the threat, the critical, the threat that those two can pose to him. For the moment, they are fully in his corner, where normally they have been skeptics of him on a lot of fronts. So again, I don't want to say that's why Donald Trump did it, because it's not. But it is an effect.
Politically, it's even gone beyond that. You've got former members of the Obama administration who are also saying, listen, some kind of action needed to be taken. The Obama administration, which was paralyzed by the fear of a slippery slope and getting dragged into something that they couldn't fully foresee, that they wouldn't be able to control the consequences of, and didn't act. And now, of course, they must look and see, listen, if this works, if it was one strike and it works and it prevents further chemical attacks, we didn't do that.
I've got to say, out in the sort of Twitter sphere last night and in sort of the new media landscape, the only people that were critical, outwardly critical, seem to be the Russians and allies of Steve Bannon, who conjured up some deeply offensive conspiracy theories, and were outwardly attacking some Breitbart people, outwardly attacking Donald Trump and Jared Kushner for being, quote, globalists. Why don't they just cut to the chase and call them international bankers? This is something that obviously, again, shows that Steve Bannon's influence inside the White House is
well, that situation has gotten really ugly. We'll get to that. There are major stories we're following this morning. The chairman of the Intel Committee is out as the top investigator into Russian meddling of the election. President Trump is set to press China's leader face-to-face over North Korea. The battle waging in the White House for President Trump's ear, and right now Steve Bannon is losing that bigly. The New York Times' Jeremy Peters joins us with his front page reporting. Chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Republican Senator John McCain, joins us here on set, plus Senator Marco Rubio and former Defense Secretary to President Bill Clinton, William Cohen. You're watching Morning Joe. We will be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.